All right, everybody, welcome. We're ready to get started. Got a couple announcements before we get our speakers on the stage. Ready? All right. How's it going, everybody? Having a good Tuesday afternoon? Great. I love it. Free pizza, free drinks. What is better? I don't know. Maybe a trip to Disneyland. That could be pretty fun. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is the Edge office. I don't know. I've seen a couple new faces tonight, so thank you all for sharing your evening with us. Edge is a self-custody crypto exchange platform. It allows users to buy, sell, trade many hundreds of assets, all while holding their own keys. What we do differently is it's like the key management process. It's less manual. You don't have to write down and store your private seed phrase. We automatically encrypt it and then back it up for you. So we're trying to make Web3 feel a little bit more like Web2. Those are really fun buzzwords, but it's the truth. We do have some sponsors. BitRefill is one of our sponsors. Basically, BitRefill allows you to use your crypto and sell it for gift cards and then live on crypto. So all the pizza and drinks that you're drinking tonight are brought to you by BitRefill. What I did was I sold Bitcoin for DoorDash gift cards on BitRefill and checked out with DoorDash credit. And they're awesome. They sponsor all of our events. So shout out to BitRefill. Edge also sponsors. We provide the venue. And Coinstructive. If you guys haven't heard of Coinstructive, they'll help you with kind of like crypto litigation. If you're a victim of a scam situation, call them. They're like your crypto PI. So they'll help you out. Speaking of scams, Edge has a pretty cool product. It's called Edge Mint. It's $15 a month, and you get premium support. So we're pretty proud of our support team. Where's Daniel? Daniel's back here. Jared's over there. They're two key members of our support team. So we vet our support team pretty heavily. They're all crypto experts. So if you need someone to call, even if it's not Edge related, we'll help you. And then we'll tell you to get on Edge because it's better. But our Edge Mint program, $15 a month. You can come and meet them in person to talk about your issues, an accelerated response time, and you get to hang out with Jared and Daniel, which is pretty fun. Yes, we have a dog. His name is Colin. He will eat the pizza if you put it on the floor, and that's not on his diet. So yeah, if you don't eat the pizza, try and make it into a trash can because he doesn't have enough teeth to even chew it. So, yeah, let's try and make sure Colin does not. It'll be like a game. All right. The purpose of the game is to not let Colin eat the pizza. All right. I'm done chit-chatting. I'm going to invite our speakers up here. Bogdan, he's one of our community members. He had the idea of hosting a Bitcoin L2 talk, and we said, who better to host it than you? So Bogdan, I'll invite you up here, give you your seat. And David Seroy, he is the growth lead at Alpen Labs, and I'm super happy to have him on here. So everybody give our speakers a round of applause.
1, 2, 3. Thank you. 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Hi, everyone. So, David, hi. I'm very excited to be here. I'm even a little bit anxious, I'm gonna tell it right now. Because I'm very thankful to Paul and Mehdi and the whole Edge team for inviting me over, because that's what, open blockchain community is all about. If you're just curious about some topic, they would just invite you over to lead the panel, to the fireside chat. So I've been looking into Bitcoin L2s for the last like 3 months. And David is the guy who actually helped me figure it out without even knowing that, without like us chit-chatting with each other, because he posted this amazing whiteboard session on YouTube, which is like an hour long. It really helped me figure out how Bitcoin L2s work on a high level, and I'm not a technical person, so that's always like a challenge to understand how crypto works if you're not a technical person. So I think that David is really the best person for us to have on this, fireside chat, because he finds the right words to describe technical things in a non-too technical way. I'm sorry if I set the bar too high, but I'm pretty sure.
Feeling the pressure to
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure that we're gonna nail it. So David is working in Alpen Labs. It's you may guess it. They're building a Bitcoin L2, but I'll let you guys you talk about it. And
Yeah, sure. So I think maybe it'd be good to kind of get like an assessment of the audience, on when some of these terms, like if we say, a ZK rollup, like are people familiar? Have they heard of that term? Okay.
who here heard about ZK Rollup? You don't necessarily should understand it, but who here heard about it? Okay, and who here heard about MEV? Just DA?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are some of the more complex things. And then what about just like a basic, the idea of like a layer 2 or scaling solution?
Keep going.
Okay, got it. So what we at Alpen Labs are building, we're building a layer 2 scaling solution for Bitcoin called a ZK Rollup. And traditionally, most people know that Bitcoin is very simple. You can't do much with it. You can only just send and receive it, and sometimes it could take 10 minutes to send. It's very clunky, it's inefficient, and so it doesn't really scale. And that's why a lot of these other chains.
Sorry, David. Should we wait before they fix the microphone? Because there's people on YouTube who are watching.
The thing with YouTube is they can only hear what goes into the mic.
I see.
So sorry about that.
No worries.
You YouTube people. Shout out to our volunteer Andrew.
Woo!
Okay, are we good
Does
to
it
go?
work now?
Hello, testing 1, 2, 3.
One more time.
Hello, testing. Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Okay, so maybe I won't go too far into details, but at Alpen Labs, we're building a layer 2 scaling solution called a ZK Rollup. Traditionally, Bitcoin is very clunky. It doesn't scale very well. That's a major reason why a lot of these other chains like Ethereum or Solana or whatnot actually exist. It was always presumed that you cannot actually build this stuff on Bitcoin in a trustless manner. Where if you have Bitcoin as the layer 1, you would have to take the asset and you bridge it into these other ecosystems, and then you can use it in Ethereum. You can use it for DeFi or to buy NFTs or to send faster transactions in stablecoins. But that bridge going from the Bitcoin layer to this other ecosystem is trusted, meaning that you're relying on some sort of centralized intermediary to facilitate that. And in theory, and sometimes in practice as well, those funds get rugged. And so it's a bit antithetical to the entire movement of Bitcoin is sure, we can get these other features, but at what cost? And the cost was at the of decentralization and kind of reintroducing intermediaries. And so it was kind of assumed that this is maybe an unsolvable problem, that Bitcoin would always just be this digital rock, and we stare at it, and it's the store of value, and it's the inflation hedge, and that's great, and we do everything else on Ethereum. But in recent years, we've kind of had this advent of this technology called ZK, or zero knowledge. And that has become a scaling solution in the Ethereum ecosystem that was really kind of pioneered over there. But there have been some few researchers on the bleeding edge, such as the team that I'm working on, Alpen Labs, that have said, hey, we can take some of that technology and we can bring it over to Bitcoin. And now you can create the Bitcoin L1 and you can have this trustless bridge into these layer 2 ecosystems. And that is, in my opinion, the kind of holy grail of everything. You can have Bitcoin as the base layer with the most amount of decentralization, with the largest collateral pool, the greatest network effects, and you can have all of the features, all of the functionality of all of the other chains. So I'm very biased in saying this, but I think it is the single most important and exciting thing happening in our entire industry.
Yeah, I'm also biased, by the way, but we'll try to be objective, and covering some of the limitations and drawbacks. But yeah, so Bitcoin L2 is quite a controversial topic because it created this clash of different philosophies. Because you have Bitcoin maxi people who think that Bitcoin should be used only for storing and transferring. It's like this digital gold. and there are like DeFi people who want to trade. You know what just David mentioned, and I like this clash of two philosophies. That's why I'm particularly excited about Bitcoin L2s. And so I think partially because of this clash, it formed different camps of people who think what Bitcoin L2s are. And so I'm curious, David, to ask you, like, what camp are you in? So that's how I see it. So there's a camp of unilateral exit. If what it means, basically, a camp that believes that every Bitcoin L2 should provide a trustless exit from the layer 2 level to back to Bitcoin, so that the scaling solution, it provides scalability without a trade-off of security. That's one camp. There's another camp that thinks that Bitcoin L2 is essentially, as long as you trade Bitcoin on this chain, it could be considered a Bitcoin L2. And there's another camp, there are different ones. So if you can just address that.
Yeah, I would say that there is kind of a third party forming, right? There's, as you alluded to, this kind of like Bitcoin maximalist, ossification, Bitcoin good, we don't care about anything camp. And then there's, yes, the kind of, we're willing to take some trust trade-offs because we want more of the features. This third camp or this third party that is essentially forming is what some people are calling this Bitcoin Renaissance, or this Bitcoin Season 2, or kind of the Bitcoin ZK Rollup movement, where you can have the best of both worlds. You can appeal to the maximalist camp that wants the utmost decentralization and security and is uncompromising on any of the trade-offs, while also having some of the features. So, like I said, I mean, it's potentially the holy grail is this third camp. A lot of it is still open research questions, and it's early, and we don't want to overpromise, but it's exciting if you can solve both worlds, and that's the third camp that I think that we're in.
Yeah. So I feel like we're already at the point where we should try to tell people how really ZK Rollups work, because it sounds like magic.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, basically, what it sounds like is that you use Bitcoin's base layer as this layer for security. You don't use resources of this layer to do the computation, but instead you do that on some layer 2, and you achieve the same level of security. Like, how do you achieve this magic?
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. I guess we'll start with like a few definitions. ZK stands for this term called zero knowledge. And traditionally, that is a privacy preserving technique, where in Bitcoin, one of the core properties is that you can run your own node. It's very easy. You can do it on a very simple computer. And so if I am to pay Bogdan 1 Bitcoin and I am running a node, I can recompute the entire history of Bitcoin from when Satoshi sent the very first Bitcoin. I can see when he mined it, the next person mined it, they sent it to XYZ person. I don't know that it's Satoshi, but I can see the addresses. I can essentially audit every single possible transaction. So I can make sure that nobody is pulling one over on me, that no one's printing more than 21 million coins, that every single transaction was actually legit. The key property there is that I can essentially audit every single piece of information. But as part of that's not very privacy preserving. In order to audit something, you need the transparency of information, so you can see it went from here to here to here. This many coins actually exist. A zero knowledge proof is a way to prove the validity of a statement without revealing the underlying contents. So I can give a proof to this entire audience and say this proof is proving that I in fact paid 1 Bitcoin to Bogdan, and that I did not create more than 21 million Bitcoins, and that I did in fact have 1 Bitcoin to send, and that he did in fact receive it, but we're not going to show any of the other information about it. We're not going to show my name or my information. We're not going to show the amount that I actually sent, or any of that balances. That is the concept of this idea of a zero knowledge proof. And so a maybe kind of more practical example of how that works is if you imagine that I have 2 apples in my hand. I have a red one and I have a green one, but I am colorblind. I have a limitation where I cannot see the different color of these apples. So how can you prove to me with mathematical certainty that these are in fact 2 different colors? And so what we would do is I would put them behind my back, I'd pull them back out front, and you say, well, now the green one's in your right hand. And then I would do it again, and now it's in my left hand. And then we do it again, and then we would do it about 100 million more times. And if you correctly answer that question 100 million times, then you have pretty much probabilistic certainty that these are in fact different colors. Now that's maybe a very simple example, but the point I'm making here is that you can take these kind of logical problems, you can turn them into mathematical equations, and you can prove the validity of the statement. So now I'm getting into how these ZK Rollup L2s actually work. Again, if you have this Bitcoin layer 1, very simple, It can't do Turing complete, smart contracts, etc. You can move all of that up onto this layer 2. And on this layer 2, balances change. Maybe one person had 10 Bitcoin, now they have 5, and then we did DeFi transactions. All these different things essentially changed. The Bitcoin layer 1 has no idea what actually happened up there. And they're not going to go through and compute all of those transactions. And so they need some way to verify the legitimacy of everything that happened up there. So you can take all of that computation and you can compress it into a zero knowledge proof, and then you can post that down onto the Bitcoin layer 1. And as a byproduct of that, you're essentially now facilitating what's called this trustless two-way peg. The long short of this means that you can take your Bitcoin from the layer 1, you can bring it up to the L2, do whatever sort of interactions and functionality and programmability that you want, and then you can trustlessly bridge those funds back without any sort of centralized intermediary. That is like a holy grail product.
Yeah. What's like, let's try to talk about the UX.
Oh, thank you.
Let's try to talk about the UX, like how it actually works. Like, for example, we have Edge, because people store Bitcoins on Edge wallets, and now they want to send it to somebody, or they might want to put it into a Lightning protocol or something like this. Let's imagine that these Bitcoin L2s are already mainnet and you can use them and it's trustless. Like, how it actually works? Like, how would the user interact with them?
So some of this still has to be
just for people to feel like the actual benefit that they might get, like in 6 months from now or something like this.
The idea that I've always pitched to the community, and the raw components for this exist, where I could go to a store and I could purchase some sort of product and use Face ID or whatever to scan my ID and approve a transaction. And on the back end, what is happening is I have Bitcoin as collateral. It is borrowing against that Bitcoin, and at 0% interest rate, it's converting that into fiat dollars, and then it's paying the end customer. And all of that entire transaction would be fully private, encrypted end-to-end, except for that final step where you actually kind of bridge into fiat. But that instantaneous 0% interest borrowing and converting into actual practical fiat, that is not a dream. Like that is a very practical product that could exist within, I'd say, the next year and a half, 2 years. Like all of the raw components for all of that exist. And again, that would be totally trustless, actually decentralized. Similarly, you can start to see just general scaling benefits. Like you could get Bitcoin into the hands of more and more people. They could self-custody it without trusting some sort of entity like Coinbase. You could, every time you send a transaction, there's usually a gas cost. You could get larger companies like Edge that could go and sponsor those gas fees for them. So, people in kind of countries where like a $1 transaction fee is just killer, you can abstract all those costs away. You can have this ultimate, what we call like the Web 2 UX, or as if you're operating, with Apple or Google or Facebook, like all of these major companies that have this beautiful UX and all these pain points that we have with Bitcoin and crypto, all of that could be actually abstracted away, and it can maintain the core ethos of this entire movement that we signed up for. No trade-offs.
Yeah, and what should happen for this to occur? Like, let's talk a little bit about BitVM and the OP CAT and the soft fork. So. Okay. Let's describe this part of the story.
Okay. In order to make these ZK rollups happen, the core ingredient that you need is the ability to verify a zero knowledge proof onto the layer 1. So if you have this layer 2 that I described, you have all this computation, all of this action happening, you create the zero knowledge proof, you compress it, and then you post it into the Bitcoin layer 1. But if that data just sits there on the layer 1 and there's nothing to be able to receive that and read it and say, okay, this proof is true or false, like I confirming that this proof is true, then it's pointless. And so about 9 months ago, there was a researcher by the name of Robin Linus who released this paper called BitVM. And the claim is that you could compute anything on Bitcoin now using BitVM. And that is an extremely bold claim, because most people understand that Bitcoin does not have a Turing complete or a programming or an expressive language. It can't do any sort of like complex computation. But what BitVM kind of enabled us to do is saying we can do some computation in a kind of clunky way. It's not very efficient, but you can perform some sort of expressivity, some sort of computation. And what a lot of people saw, they said, oh, whoa, we don't need this thing to do DeFi contracts and NFTs or all of this other stuff. We just need to do one single thing, which is the ability to receive a zero knowledge proof and verify if it is true or false. Because if you have that one single thing, then you can do all of that DeFi, all that NFT, all that other stuff on the layer 2. You can make it into a zero knowledge proof, and then you can send it to the Bitcoin L1. So BitVM is kind of the fundamental breakthrough here that allows us to have these things called ZK Rollups. Do you want me to go into kind of the more detailed nuances of BitVM?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I feel like I really want to check on the crowd. Does it make sense? You can just show me with your hand if you don't understand something. Okay.
No, that's
Can
great.
you just shout a question? What part do you don't understand?
Yeah, go ahead, go into it.
Okay, we'll go into it, and then I think it'd be great, at some point to open this up to the audience, because I imagine there are terms and vernacular that I'm using where it's just like I say one thing and it loses people.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
also
totally
don't
fair.
want us to talk like for 40 minutes, and then the actual discussion will start when people ask questions. So let's kind of.
Okay, so BitVM is this idea where you can receive this zero knowledge proof on the Bitcoin layer 1, and you can verify its legitimacy. The primary issue there is there's something called a challenge response period, where in order for BitVM to receive this zero knowledge proof and verify it, it can take 6 months of time. That's huge. So imagine you're trying to bridge from the layer 2 to the layer 1. Sure, there's no trusted intermediary, but if it takes 6 months to receive your money back, I mean, that's like absolutely insanely brutal. So a lot of the efforts right now are saying, how can we take this kind of very clunky implementation of BitVM, which gives us the trustlessness and gives us the ZKPs and all of this, but shrink that essentially window down from like 6 months to, I think 1 month is probably the best that you can do, which is what our team has done. But there are efforts to make a BitVM 2, which reduces that down to 2 weeks. And then maybe you could even improve that beyond that to where there's really no delay and no period to verify these zero knowledge proofs. In that case, you would have this kind of the ultimate end game solution where you can bridge your Bitcoin onto the L2 and back with no trusted intermediary, and you don't have this kind of 6-month game to go out and play.
Yeah. So we talked. Yeah, please.
All right, so what is a ZK rollup? What is it?
Oh, okay. So some people are familiar with this concept of a sidechain. So back in 2014, Blockstream, which is a very powerful and kind of like the earliest, Bitcoin-related company, they were trying to come up with ways to scale Bitcoin. They understood the limitations of Bitcoin, and so they came up with this white paper called sidechains, where you'd have the Bitcoin main chain, and then you have a separate, totally independent blockchain. And maybe it would have like larger blocks or higher throughput. Maybe this one would have privacy. And so you could essentially take your Bitcoin and go into these other side chains. The fundamental issue with side chains is that the bridge mechanism that I mentioned, where taking your Bitcoin from the L1 into these side chains or these L2s is trusted. You would essentially be trusting this company, Blockstream. They would kind of be like a quasi-bank where they're taking, if Bitcoin is gold, you're giving your gold to the bank, they're giving you an IOU, and they say, don't worry, trust us, it's backed by the gold and we'll allow you to redeem it. ZK Rollups are basically that concept of side chains without the trusted intermediary. Does that make sense?
Too good to be true?
Sounds like math.
There's a lot of math. A lot of it's much smarter than me. Yes?
So you can have TK rollups on Ethereum blockchain, and you can also do Polygon too, but that's not a good idea because they got hacked. I mean, there's a list of them that my concern right now is if you do a contract on the blockchain and you make it as perfect as you possibly can, but it's too large, the block won't accept it.
Sorry, can we get a mic for a
Yeah,
second?
let me give her this mic.
So if you move into the rollups, I think you guys use validators, right? You use validators, right?
In
And
Bitcoin, they're
so-
called miners, but
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. But the problem is the security, because anytime, on the Ethereum blockchain, anytime you add anything from the outside onto the blockchain, if you don't do it perfect, I tell you, the hackers will, it'll lead them right to it, to your wallet, because you want to attach it. You want a nice blockchain developed outside of the blockchain, and then you want to put it back on the blockchain. And so they even said that the validators, or it's been said that the validators, you can't even trust them. I mean, you can't even trust, a lot of the people that are actually, doing the work on that particular chain, so, but if you don't trust the validators or they turn on you, then you've got the same problem. So do you guys have a security method that you use? I'm asking, for a reason, because we can pretty much mirror each other. We can do the same thing on the Ethereum blockchain that you're trying to do on Bitcoin, so what is your plan for that to keep
Yeah,
out
so
of it?
the core idea of a ZK rollup is, again, it's this layer 2, which is kind of like a side chain with this kind of trustless bridge from the layer 1 to the layer 2. And a ZK rollup, technically, it inherits the security of the layer 1. And so if you build a ZK rollup, like a Polygon ZK rollup on top of Ethereum, it's inheriting the security of Ethereum. So you are essentially trusting the Ethereum validators. And that's, probably pretty good. I think Ethereum is mostly proven to be, like decentralized. But the holy grail that everybody wants is Bitcoin, because Bitcoin throughout the years has been uncompromising on security, to the point where it's caused civil wars in the community, and a lot of people have abandoned Bitcoin. It's been an extremely contentious issue. But for all the things that people can complain about Bitcoin, what they cannot complain about is that they've cut any corners on security and decentralization. So the ZK rollup, in theory, if it's designed properly, will inherit those security properties of Bitcoin, giving it, in my opinion, the best security assumptions that you can possibly have. Is there a risk that one of the contracts, it was just programmed incorrectly and that there is a bug? Yes, absolutely. But how do I want to say this?
Well, it's going to be auditable anyway on open source, so.
Yes, everything will be auditable. It'll be open source. You're effectively trusting the mathematics behind these zero knowledge proofs.
Yeah.
Could it be hacked? Could it break? Yes, but like in theory, you could create this kind of trustless bridge. I think in some of the stuff that you're talking about, the way that those things have been hacked, it was almost like it wasn't in theory a perfect security solution. People knew that there were holes. It was just kind of exposed. So there's a fundamental difference between a design that's flawed, or like a system that's flawed by design, and something that's not necessarily flawed by design, but it was just implemented incorrectly. And what I'm saying is, like, the Bitcoin ZK rollups appear to not be flawed by design, but sure, like, could somebody accidentally incorrectly implement it wrong? Maybe. But to Bogdan's point, all of the code and everything is open source. I'm sure it'll go through extensive amount of reviews. It's fundamentally different. Like sometimes I feel like I'm up here and it's like, this is not a side chain. This is not like a trusted setup where it's like, oh, like, don't worry, we're actually controlling the keys on the back end. Like, this is, I think widely considered like the most exciting stuff happening in the industry, because it kind of bypasses a lot of these security and trust holes that other chains are unwilling to I guess, like, divulge.
Yeah, I think to me what's really revolutionary with ZK is that I think it's a whole new spectrum of technologies which really changes the way we achieve integrity and authenticity of data or computation. Because before ZK, the only way to achieve integrity is to basically, as you said, trust majority of validators, because every node runs the same computation, and then they have consensus, so they agree that this computation has this result. And now with ZK, you basically can have a single node that runs the computation, but then you will still obviously trust validators on the base layer who will verify that the result of computation run by the single server is actually correct. So that's, I don't know, this idea helped me grasp this ZK stuff.
Let me try a different example.
Let's do an open discussion, by the way. I think it makes much more sense than trying to abide to some questions. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hand and we're gonna give you a mic.
So I'll quickly just add here, again, assume we have this layer 1, we have the layer 2, all of this stuff is happening. Let's assume on the layer 2, the validators or the nodes are malicious. It's somebody that wants to steal everything, and we got it wrong, and they're like, haha, yes, I have like all of these like billions of dollars I'm going to steal. the way this ZK rollup mechanism works is they literally cannot steal unless they provide a valid zero knowledge proof. So they can try to submit a transaction and say, hey, like Alice doesn't actually own those funds. I actually own these funds. The proof would essentially not be valid. It would not be true. So it turns the paradigm from a don't be evil on the validators. We're telling the validators don't be evil. So we're saying validators, you cannot be evil. And that is, yeah, I mean that's the key difference.
So I know you mentioned like Bitcoin scalability, slow transactions was one of the reasons for layer 2s. If I want to get into a layer 2 for fast transactions, like the Solana's half a second confirmation time, how am I guaranteed any level of security in half a second, given that I presume you can't really publish a proof on the Bitcoin blockchain, given its 10-minute block times? So what kind of security guarantees do I have on an L2?
Yep.
Either what you guys might be building or what you're seeing in the industry, because I know there's a bunch of different L2s. But yeah, I'm curious about that. Like, what kind of security can I get in between 10 minutes?
Yep. So there's a concept known as pre-confirmations, Paul, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But if we're operating on the L2 and Bogdan submits a transaction to me, what Paul is essentially saying is I can receive that transaction and I can create the zero knowledge proof, but I cannot submit that zero knowledge proof to the Bitcoin chain until once essentially every 10 minutes. So there's kind of this 10-minute period where things are potentially in limbo and they're not actually finalized. And so there's a concept known as pre-confirmations, where if Bogdan is submitting a transaction, I can give him, if I'm the validator on this layer 2, I can give him what's called a pre-confirmation, kind of a transaction receipt, where I say, I am giving you assurance that I will submit this transaction in 10 minutes. And so if he definitively wants absolute 100% assurance, then he needs to wait 10 minutes for that proof to be submitted to the Bitcoin chain and confirm that it exists on the Bitcoin chain. But
if you're buying coffee, then it's fine to have a pre-confirmation.
Right. I mean, it kind of depends on the level of security that people are willing to take. Or I could put something at stake. On this layer 2, I could be this validator, and I could say, well, I'm going to put up, $1 million or whatever, and I will ensure you that your transaction will go into the Bitcoin block in 10 minutes. And that may give enough assurance where you go, okay, if this guy tries to, not submit it in 10 minutes, my transaction doesn't get finalized, I am economically insured. But the beauty of these pre-confirmation setups is ultimately that we can process transactions instead of 10 minutes, we can do it in like 100 milliseconds. I mean, instant, almost like high frequency trading, type status, or kind of like the limits of, the speed of light. And that is one of the benefits of operating on these layer 2s, is like the better UX, the more seamless transactions. It's very fast, it's very instant, it's very, very snappy. But to some extent, Paul, which I think you're hinting at, is that during that 10-minute period, there will be some form of trust that is involved. And frankly, that's the same case in Ethereum as well.
Yeah, there are always assumptions.
One over here.
And one topic I really want to
Mic
make
check.
sure we touch on as well while we're here is the soft fork. But
Yeah.
I'll let people ask some more questions. And I see your hand there, so yeah.
I was just
No, there's the person there, and then you will ask a question, then I will ask a question. Let's do like this.
I was just really curious about what you said regarding a validator being able to have insurance. How does the person sending the Bitcoin get to choose a validator that has insurance versus doesn't have insurance? Is that like in the works?
Some of this is kind of like an implementation detail. In some of these ZK rollups, just to make an example very simple, again, you have the L1, you have this layer 2. One of the benefits of a ZK rollup is that you can have just one single validator. You can have one hyper-centralized, single validator. And on the surface, that seems like it's antithetical to this movement of like decentralization. But as I kind of alluded to before, is if that one single centralized validator, remember, it's not don't be evil, it's cannot be evil. That one centralized sequencer, they cannot submit an invalid state, or they cannot essentially process transactions unless they're being honest. So to answer your question, it's very simple. There would probably only be one single sequencer. There are schemes to where you could decentralize these kind of validators. And sorry, when I'm saying validators and nodes and sequencers, you can think of those all as the same thing effectively. Yeah, it would essentially just be one centralized party. Maybe in the future there are schemes where you can decentralize that, and just like Ethereum and Bitcoin, you have many of these kind of validators or these nodes that exist on the layer 2, because in addition to them, the fact that they can't be evil, you still want kind of like what are called liveness assurances, where even if that one validator is being honest, like what happens if they just go down? Like what if they die, they pass away? Like you want some additional redundancy there. But the bottom line is they can't steal, and it's very easy to find the ones that kind of offer you the insurance, so to speak. A lot of that would be abstracted away. You as the user would have no idea. It would just happen for you automatically.
And obviously, I think it's worse sense, like saying that for non-technical people who cannot audit the code, they still trust developers who are building these things. So, it's never completely trustless. There's always assumptions. You wanted to ask a question there. Maybe somebody can pass the mic. Oh, okay, you already have it. You're prepared.
I'm in. What's up, guys? Hello, I'm Ryan. We're talking a lot about validation, and I'm just curious if you have some insight on PCI and kind of how that relates to this transaction.
I do not have any insight on that. Yeah, I'm not even familiar with PCI.
Payment card industry validation kind of check boxes. I'm a credit card guy, so I guess maybe I'm outside of the realm with you guys over here.
Yeah, totally fair. I think for me personally, that's outside of my scope. I think that would be something that you operate on the chain or on the ZK rollup, and then when you want to get into the quote unquote real world, you would essentially kind of like cross that chasm and go into your world. So
from crypto to fiat.
I think for us, we're saying, okay, we've done our part. Now we'll hand it off to you.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the question that I want to ask to you, David, and like once again, just to cover it all. So the future, at least we think it's gonna look like it, is that we're gonna have this base layer, and basically all those L2s, they buy security from the base layer, they do some transactions there, and users can deposit their funds on the L2, then they can do some trading there, and then they can go back to Bitcoin L1. And for this, for this to be as trustless as we want, we need to have a soft fork on Bitcoin, which, it's not yet there. So my question to you is, do you think it will be there? My personal answer to this is yes. But if somebody would come up to me and say, like, would you put your money on this? That the soft fork is happening. I'm not sure what my answer would be. So I'm curious, like, yeah, what's your answer, and would you put your money on the fact that it's just a matter of time that the soft fork is actually happening?
Okay, I think it's important to give a lot of background here, because this strikes at the core of probably the most interesting, like, philosophical battles in this entire industry. So everybody knows Bitcoin was the first, and then as it grew, it ran into these scaling issues. And in 2017, there was something called the block size war. And this was a civil war inside the Bitcoin community, where there was one camp that hey, buddy. Okay.
You failed the game of not letting the dog,
Yeah,
but it was
water.
it was about pizza, but.
And so there was this block size war, which was essentially seen as a kind of civil war in the Bitcoin community, because there was one camp that said, hey, we're running up against the transaction limits, the fees are going high, we need to scale this thing, we want programmability, we want all of this stuff. And they wanted to change Bitcoin. But by changing Bitcoin, they would make the requirements to run a node or to be one of these validators that everybody's mentioning much, much higher. And so now, if instead of being a part of the Bitcoin network, you needed to run maybe on a MacBook, and then maybe instead of on a MacBook, you need to be on a big server, and then maybe instead of being on a big server, you need to run it on a big, Amazon web server, and then all of a sudden AWS and Bezos, owns all of Bitcoin. And so it's kind of this slippery slope between, do we want to maintain the decentralization principles of Bitcoin, or do we want to scale it? And so there was this huge chasm in the Bitcoin community where one camp wanted to change Bitcoin, which is called a soft fork. And the other camp said no, because we would think that we would be undermining the decentralization principles of Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And what ultimately ended up happening is the people that kind of rejected the change, which are what we call the small blockers. The small blockers kind of won, and that set a tone in Bitcoin where a lot of you may have a perception of Bitcoin where it's like these old curmudgeons that don't want any change, they don't want any innovation. A lot of that happened because of this civil war that happened in 2017. And so the community is very, very resistant to making any changes to Bitcoin because they're afraid it will essentially undermine, again, these core principles that we actually talk about. But that, of course, opened up huge markets for all of the other things that you guys are probably known about, just the broader blockchain industry and Ethereum and Solana and, who knows whatever else, people are into. But what Bogdan is kind of getting at is more recently there have been discussions in the Bitcoin community where people are warming up to this idea. They say, okay, maybe there's some changes that we're willing to make because we think that they are secure, that they don't undermine decentralization, and that they add to some level of features that we really value in the Bitcoin community. And one of those changes is a broad category called covenants. And then one of the specific proposals within covenants is called CAT, or op concatenate. It's a very, very simple proposal. It just allows you to concatenate like two elements, like literally if you have the number 21 and 22, it becomes 2122. But that very simple idea, being able to just do that type of programmability on Bitcoin could potentially open up huge other applications. And one of them is the ability to natively verify a zero-knowledge proof. If you recall, I discussed that the breakthrough with creating these zero-knowledge rollups, or these ZK rollups on Bitcoin, is that we have BitVM. You can receive the zero-knowledge proof to Bitcoin, but it could take 6 months or 1 month to take some amount of period to kind of verify whether that is true or false. If we had this soft fork, this change to Bitcoin, you eliminate that time frame completely. And you can just receive the zero-knowledge proof, and you can trustlessly bridge in and out. Like, that is kind of the holy grail. And so I think it would be, for those of us that nerd out on kind of the lore of Bitcoin and the kind of like underlying politics, I mean, this is like prime time what's happening in Bitcoin right now. It's extremely exciting. So that's OpCat. That's kind of the history on soft forks. That's why Bitcoin is the way it is, and that's potentially what the future is.
Yeah, you're gonna see a lot of news like over the next 6 months about whether the soft fork is happening or not, and we're still not sure. And as far as I understand, you guys are building, not assuming that soft fork is happening, and you're just trying to find your way using BitVM type of bridge.
Exactly. Our default assumption is that no changes will ever happen to Bitcoin. And what's the best solution that we can build? Without that, and then if changes happen, we'll support it.
Mic check. Okay. I was wondering if you could maybe give some resources or companies or people to follow in the space where they could learn more about this, aside from everyone just reaching out to you. What are some people that you trust or resources?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'll show.
I would mention David and his whiteboard session, which I already did. So,
if anybody cares about the whiteboard, which I do think it helped a lot of people. It's a pinned tweet on my Twitter, David_Seroy, my last name. I think our website, alpenlabs.io, has some good resources. There is also a research paper that's a little more digestible from somebody named John Light, who wrote that. There's another team named Citrea, or Chainway Labs, who I think that we respect in the space, who's putting out some good content. And then there's an influencer, somebody named Eric Wall, who's part of Taproot Wizards. If anybody has heard of him, I think that he's actually quite knowledgeable as well, as much as he's a little bit of a troll. And yeah.
So I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Hey, how you doing? I don't know if this thing's hot or not. So when this is all said and done, it actually all works out. Everything's great. Bitcoin now has layer 2 capabilities. And for those that aren't familiar, I'm thinking in terms of like what you can do on Ethereum, right? Staking, lending, options trading. Because we went from this idea of currency, send and receive securely, aka mine. That's what you have in Bitcoin. Ethereum, all the aforementioned, Solana, all that stuff. Great, cool. Do you think that there will be like an ultimate FOMO back into Bitcoin, where all the people that are now in Camp Solana, Camp Ethereum, Camp Layer 1s that do all these things where they're going to finally have an inflection point and go, screw all these non-secure, potentially non-secure layer ones that might be centralized based on ownership, and then just go back into Bitcoin? I mean, do you think that this will create a cascade like that sometime in the future?
I think that we're already seeing it. I mean, to some extent, some of these things that these other chains have built are fantastic, and I want to give them their flowers, and I'm sure they will carve out markets. But I will tell you, behind the scenes, what we're seeing is there's a reversal of the brain drain that has kind of left Bitcoin, where a lot of the research and the kind of technical titans left Bitcoin, and now a lot of them are coming back. And we're seeing not just VC investment, but just like the powerhouses of the biggest names in the space that you can possibly imagine, like people like Vitalik and Justin Drake and I don't want to name off all these other names, but I can tell you that like any of the big companies that you think are major players, they're starting to pay attention to Bitcoin again, and it's really, really, really freaking exciting.
Yeah.
Do I think that Bitcoin is gonna 50x and everybody's in it for the money? Like probably not. But do I think that it will be on par as a major competitor with any of the features that any of these other chains have, with the added benefit of the decentralization and the network effect and the kind of brand of having like the monetary revolution? Yes. And I won't go on a huge rant here, but I will say, like, for me personally, I'm a monetary maximalist. I come from that, like, Austrian camp. I very much believe in this idea of, like, monetary debasement and, like, the eventual demise of the dollar. And I do think that Bitcoin owns that category more so than any of these other chains. And that's a huge differentiator.
Hello? You spoke to the relation about Bit420 OpCat with BitVM and other Bitcoin L2s. I wonder how contingent are the Bitcoin L2s on that getting passed through?
Well, it depends which Bitcoin L2 you're saying. So just to kind of put like the broad space out there, I think your default assumption is every single person is guilty until proven innocent. And I'll even put ourselves, Alpen Labs in that category. Yes, we have the people who quite literally like wrote the papers on this and have published kind of like the thought pieces on it. But even us, like until we push out code, like we are essentially guilty. Most of the chains, I would say, are not dependent on OpCat. The only one that is, which is kind of pushing it now, is Starkware.
Mm-hmm.
So Starkware is a layer 2 ZK rollup that exists on top of Ethereum. And if you have this BIP420, which you're alluding to, also known as OpCat, which is a type of covenant, which is being pushed by people like Eric Wall, if you had that, then you could start verifying Starks, STARKs, which are a type of zero-knowledge proof on Bitcoin L1. And then Starkware, this company, which existed in Bitcoin or Ethereum layer 2, would essentially want to come on to Bitcoin. So to answer your question, that's probably the only company that definitively says, look, if we get that, we're going to come on. If we get CAD, then maybe we at Alpen, maybe we pivot. Maybe some of these other chains also pivot because it's a very enticing solution. But we don't necessarily need it.
I think we're out of time. Is that right? Or do we have some time for one question?
Yeah, well, come on.
One sec, for the microphone.
I had a thought, because I'm always worried about the security of my contracts, and I talked to Chat about that extensively, because you can have a two-way conversation. And I asked him, I said, can you develop like a Praetorian Guard? He'd make a great Praetorian Guard, and how would that work? And he said, well, I would have to write an entire library, because you can't put something on the chain, you can't do anything, you can't write contracts if you don't have a library, to extract some of the information from it. And he proceeded to write a library. Now I have to say that I didn't understand the language at all, but it only took him about, once he got started, it was ridiculous. So have you ever thought of doing something like that? You'd have the ultimate security. I know there's always this issue, with having an artificial intelligence like that, and I realize that, but it could actually bring everything up to a higher level, because the security, you have this Praetorian Guard that's checking everything, and even the contracts, and the people that are writing the contracts, and the validators, and implementing that into your ways of broadening Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that may be a little further out, where I don't think like this kind of AI is at the level yet where we could trust it to write some of these, what you're calling library or whatever people will call tooling and infrastructure and the broader smart contracts, and really have like certainty that it's actually reliable. Because a lot of that information, this like Praetorian Guard that you're speaking about, it's essentially training itself off of all of the other pre-existing stuff that has been written by humans. It's not really coming up with anything novel, and so it's subject to all of the other input data that's been put into it. And so if that data hasn't been checked and audited, like it to some extent, like we still need that kind of human element there. So maybe in the future we could have something like this, but for now, a lot of this stuff has to kind of be written by humans and ultimately battle tested in the real world, where it's like we've built this library or this smart contract or this tooling, let's throw it out there, put $1 billion in it, and that's like a pretty good bounty for somebody to come and like hack it and try to break it. And so that's why over the years, you know, as a lot of this stuff is so novel and so new, you saw huge amounts of hacks. But now, like the hacks are really shrinking because a lot of this stuff had been kind of like, you know, battle tested in the real world. That's the ultimate measure. Like there's no, you know, AI or AGI that I would trust until you put, you know, $10 billion in it and you say, here's a bounty, somebody can go and hack this.
All right. Any last words from our speakers? I do have a couple announcements before you guys go back to the beer cooler. So if you can hang tight after they do their final announcements. But anything else to say?
I don't know.
Bogdan, I don't think we got an intro for you.
Oh yeah, I'm from Ukraine. I moved here about a year ago actually. So I live in San Diego now. I work for this Ukrainian company called Distributed Lab. We're doing research and development services for different foundations and blockchains and, you know, different startups, working in ZK space as well. So yeah, I'm doing business development there. Personally excited about Bitcoin L2s. I think we started off very technical, and like we should have asked more questions to the people before we even start, but it's a very good exercise. But yeah, it was great. Thank you, David, so much for being here with us and describing all this.
No worries. I could see a lot of looks of confusion as we went on, so I'm sorry, but you know, hopefully this will be the first of many touch points where you'll kind of begin to see the further vision.
Yeah, for me it took like 3 months to even start to understand this really. So, thank you. Don't forget.
All right. Thank you for hanging in there. A couple things I wanted to say. We really appreciate your feedback. Last meetup, we heard quite a few people say we didn't have enough non-alcoholic beverage options. So this time we provided a little bit more. I know, right? Who doesn't want to drink beer? So yeah, that feedback is really valuable. It's a small team and we want everyone to have a great time. So just let us know if there's anything you want or want to hear of, a topic or a speaker that you know that you want to have on stage. Another thing is if you download Edge tonight, myself, Paul, Daniel, Jared, anybody who works at the Edge team will send you $5 in Bitcoin. Or I don't know if it's Bitcoin, it might be Doge. We'll get you started with $5 in crypto so you can mess around with it. So reach out to any of us. Lastly, I wanted to shout out our volunteers. This is a super volunteer-based group. The founders of Edge actually met at this meetup group back in the day, and that's how Edge became a company. So we find a lot of value in this, and we appreciate you guys all for being here. I want to do a quick exercise. It's not like an exercise, but we've done this in the past. Basically, if you feel like your crypto knowledge is pretty high or adequate, I want to ask you to raise your hand. And then if anyone wants, just take a look around. Any newbies, those are the people that, you know, I want you guys to go chat with. This is a very reciprocative, I don't think that's a word, reciprocal community. So yeah, reach out to one another, and yeah, thanks for coming. That's all I got. Thanks, guys. Oh, one last thing. We have another meetup tomorrow night. Same place. It's a it's a San Diego JavaScript meetup. So it's not so crypto, it's more technical JavaScript. So, sorry. That's my last announcement. Tomorrow night, same place, JavaScript. 6:30.
Es war einmal in einem kleinen Städtchen, da lebte ein Mädchen namens Barbara. Und diese Barbara war im ganzen Land für ihren abartig guten Rhabarberkuchen bekannt.
Ja, man konnte sagen, dass Barbaras Rhabarberkuchen ohne Wenn und Aber gar eine geradezu magische Erfahrung war. Abracadabra.
Ja, dieser Kuchen war geradezu bombastisch und die Nachfrage danach erstarkte drastisch. Barbara eröffnete noch im selben Jahr eine Bar und nannte sie Barbaras Rhabarberbar.
In der Stadt gab es auch ein paar Barbaren, die hatten von Barbaras Rhabarberbar erfahren. Und da sie fortan jeden Tag bei Barbara waren, nannte man sie bald die Rhabarbarbaren.
In den Folgejahren ließen die Barbaren nach und nach ihr barbarisches Gebaren fahren. Sie waren, behauptete Barbara, fast noch sympathischer als Barbarpapa.
Aber die Barbaren waren stark behaart und hatten alle einen struppigen Barbarenbart.
Ja, nicht apart.
Daraufhin schickte Barbara ihre Barbarenfreunde zum Barbarenbartbarbier.
Der frisierte den Barbaren sogar